What's going on, everybody? It's that time again, the AllSooners Podcast, episode 135 on this Thursday edition, August 11th, 2022. Just 23 days until Oklahoma plays UTEP. Season opener is a little over 3 weeks away. Josh Callaway in Oklahoma City, Ryan Chapman and more, John Hoover in Tulsa. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Excited to be back on the podcast. If we were responsible podcasters, we would have podcasted late Sunday night when the Cale Gundy news broke. But we've been taking it all in, waiting for official word from the coach, and so finally got that yesterday. I guess it was official word what we got yesterday. It was kind of not.
It helped. It helped.
I think it helped. But yeah, no, it helped. It was helpful. It was good content.
Well, and we'll get into it, but I thought that yesterday was fascinating. Obviously, I wasn't in the room with you guys. I was making sure that everyone could hear that out on the franchise, stuff like that. But I thought it was a fascinating press conference and an interesting window into how Brent Venables is going to handle these things going forward.
100%. It was illuminating, especially his answer to Hoov's question, which I thought was maybe the most interesting answer the entire day. And we'll talk about that. Obviously, we're going to get into all of it. As you might guess, the big news, the bombshell news that came out of nowhere, Cale Gundy, longtime OU assistant, the longest tenured assistant at Oklahoma since 1999, played with OU in the early 90s, announced his resignation on Sunday night pretty much out of nowhere. I mean, you guys can speak for yourself. I had heard nothing about this. This was a complete blindside for me. Like Hoof said, many shows, and it makes sense, obviously, do kind of an emergency podcast, immediately talk about it. We've had a chance to kind of let the dust settle here, very similar to whenever Lincoln left for USC. We didn't have an emergency podcast then either. We kind of let the dust settle. We absorbed the news for a couple days and then came at it. We're kind of having a similar opportunity here as we sit here Thursday. We've had a chance to go to a couple practices, hear from Brent Venables yesterday, like these guys just referenced, and kind of let it wash over us. We're going to get into all the ripple effects and all of that. But just first, I guess, the reaction from you guys when you saw this news, because for me, it was hard to process because just Cale Gundy, and who can speak to it better than Ryan and I, just because he's covered the team for a lot longer than us. He is OU football. He's been at OU forever. He's coached at OU since I was 2 years old. I mean, that he is always at Oklahoma. Like, it's going to just, for removing all the context out of it, of just what happened and why he's gone and the decision, it's just going to be weird that he's not there anymore. We just talked to him at Media Day last week, and he was talking about how excited he is, and he's never been more excited for OU football. And turn around a few days later, and he's announcing his resignation on Twitter. It's just, it still doesn't feel like it happened. It's weird and jarring, and I don't know. Like I said, it won't feel totally real until I guess there's games. And I look at the sideline, and he's not over there.
Yeah, he's in a lot of ways, he's Mr. OU. He's been there for 353 games as a player, suiting up as a starting quarterback, as a assistant coach, student coach, associate head coach, recruiting coordinator, all that stuff. 353 total games. Just a remarkable legacy he leaves, both as a player and as a coach and as a recruiter. My first reaction was, we need to do something about his playing days, his legacy. And that was, his legacy is wholly unique, you guys. I mean, he's the only one. He's the first ever at Oklahoma to be recruited to OU and say, okay, now Troy Aikman, to a degree, Troy Aikman was getting ready to change the culture at Oklahoma, broke his leg and had to leave, went to USC, went back to the wishbone. Went back to Jamel Holloway. Charles Thompson came in. It was Cale Gundy who came in behind those guys in 1990 and said, okay, we're going to move to a passing offense. We're going to get out of this split T, veer, wishbone offense that has been part of the OU DNA for 40, 50 years, and we're going to start throwing the football. You look at his career numbers, 6,100, 6,200 yards, whatever it is. Nowadays a guy will get that in a season and a half, right? So put it in perspective, but at the same time, he broke every career passing record at Oklahoma, every passing record there was. And it's because they threw the ball more than 8 times a game or 6 times a game. He was the first quarterback to ever do that at Oklahoma. So he deserves a lot of credit for that. Kind of bringing the offensive football, the offensive mindset out of what can be called the Stone Age. I remember when he was a player, guys. Oh, this Gundy punk, he's just like his brother. He throws the football too much. Throws the football too much. He threw the football like 15 times a game. But that helped bridge that gap and change the culture. And eventually, 1999, he comes back as an assistant coach, Bob Stoops, right? 1999, he's the third guy that Stoops hired. What does he do? He helps. He wasn't the quarterback's coach, but he helped with the offense, and he helped Josh Heupel come in and break every one of his records. So from there, he's just been a recruiting dynamo. So you're right, Josh. It's just weird to think Mr. OU, Cale Gundy, 353 games, is no longer at OU.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the legacy of the playing days. It was Aikman before he went to UCLA, and then Gundy before kind of this recent rash of Oklahoma quarterbacks being a thing. Then you fast forward to his coaching days. He worked with the quarterbacks, the running backs, the wide receiver, basically anyone on the offense outside of the offensive line room. Cale Gundy has had his fingerprints on at some point. And then you just talk about what he did as a recruiter. You obviously see all the outpouring from the former players coming out, and everyone knows the Adrian Peterson stuff, Mixon, P. Right, like the list. We ran it. It's long, distinguished, but you just talk about right now. Joe John Finley is on staff. Who was on staff helping recruit around when Joe John was there? Oh, Cale Gundy. DeMarco Murray. DeMarco Murray's took over Cale Gundy's old room when he arrived, right? Like that running back room is what Cale Gundy recruited him to come play in. Jeff Lebby is a guy that was recruited in part by Cale Gundy when Cale Gundy was on staff. Like he's leaving behind an offensive coaching staff that a majority of those guys he played a role in bringing in and kind of helping bring along at Oklahoma. He's still was obviously a factor in OU recruiting to this day. And something you just dropped in there, John, like might not think about this, but Cale's the first guy I remember ever using the OU DNA hashtag. And then that's become a core tenet of the merch OU has as far as recruiting. Yeah. Like that's a whole recruiting silo of advertising almost that is a Cale Gundy thing. So that's going to live on. All these assistant coaches that are still on staff are going to live on. It's what's made this, I think, such a difficult conversation for the Oklahoma fan base to grapple with, because you have all that in the background of what was a mistake, and it's a mistake that ultimately this was the only outcome, in my opinion, that could have come from that mistake, right? And so that in the background is what's made this so difficult. This is the example I kind of use with Chisholm on the radio, is that, and I'm not going to use a name in this hypothetical because I don't want to attach anyone to it, but pick random hypothetical new offensive analyst who's been at Oklahoma for 8 months. If that's the person that this had happened to, it would have been a 100%. Everyone would have come out and said, good on Brent Venables. You can't have this in your program. He's setting the tone early. But because it's a guy with so much history at this university, I think that's what it's been so hard for a lot of fans to grapple with, that doing the right thing doesn't always sit well, isn't always easy. Brent Venables said that yesterday. Like the program's strong with Cale Gundy, but this is what had to happen. And credit to Brent Venables for walking the walk after 8 months of talking about what he wants this program to be and talk about accountability and integrity.
Yeah, look, I wanted to get into that more that Ryan was just talking about there, the fan reaction, because it definitely seems like, and you guys can give your own take on it, but it seems like generally speaking, it's pretty positive for Cale. A lot of OU fans are very upset that Cale was let go, thinking that he had built up enough goodwill basically over 2+ decades of coaching that one mistake, shouldn't, be the end of his career essentially at Oklahoma. And this is the first time Brent Venables has had any backlash, hardly. And that's why he put that second statement out the next day, kind of articulating, hey, I hear you. We're standing by it. We're not reinstating him, basically, because that was kind of a conversation for like 2 seconds there. And then he goes on the podium yesterday, and I want to lead right into who of your questions to him, and you can talk about it more because obviously you asked it. But basically, Brent was honest in that, look, it's different for everybody. Some coaches maybe would be okay and give him a second shot here, but this is basically a zero tolerance for him. some areas are going to be maybe not zero tolerance for him that would be for other coaches. He kind of was open about that. They're humans. It's kind of a guy-to-guy decisions on this kind of thing. And so this is the first time that you feel like Brent Venables is going to have to, he's choosing his words carefully. He's trying to calm the waters a little bit because for the most part that I've seen, overwhelming. I mean, there was a petition to reinstate Cale. I mean, it seems like overwhelming fans were not pleased with this and are still not pleased with this and would have liked to have seen Cale keep his job.
It's kind of a fractured fan base right now. They didn't think that it was just. The punishment didn't fit the crime. I heard somebody say, I think it was Jim Traber say, if he had come in the room that day, the receiver room, and pointed at every guy and said, "You're a blank, you're a blank, you're a blank," it would have been the same exact punishment as picking up the kid's iPad and reading blank, blank, blank. Same exact punishment. So a lot of people are saying that it was unjust. A lot of people are saying, no, I shouldn't say a lot of people. I've seen the sentiment that Venables is in over his head. He doesn't know what he's doing. He overreacted. He's playing politics. You can say whatever you want. This is his program, and this is his first real opportunity to put his fingerprints on it. Something that the question that I asked was about, when Brent left in, 2011, 2012, he didn't wear his faith on his sleeve like he does now. I think being around Dabo Swinney for a decade gave him confidence or conviction to do that, to be able to come out and profess his faith and, being a strong Christian and all that. So the question I asked him was about forgiveness, which is at the very center of the Christian faith. That's one of the main tenets: forgiveness and grace and second chances. And how does he kind of balance that with the need to make really hard, really difficult, unpopular even decisions about like this, about his players or about his coaching staff? How does he balance that? And I thought his answer was pretty revealing, guys. He talked about some of the relationships that his mother had through the years as a kid, abusive. And he said, do those guys who were repeat abusers in a domestic violence situation, domestic relationship, do they deserve forgiveness? He said, I don't think so, is what his answer was. And so
right, that
might draw criticism from the faithful, so to speak, as selective forgiveness. But being the CEO of a college football blue blood like this, being a guy who has to be the face of the program and make very difficult, unpopular decisions, he's got to have priorities. And right now, I think his priority is the good of the program, the good of the players. He talked about protecting them and keeping them safe and things like that. And then I'll just add this. In 2017, there was an incident on the Clemson practice field where a player was yelled at by his coach, and what happened was the player blocked the wrong player in the drill, and he yelled at himself. The player yelled at himself, "I blocked the wrong effing blank." N-word. He was talking to himself. And the position coach started yelling at him, and he repeated his phrase twice. He repeated exactly what he said, including the N-word. And so in 2020, Dabo was asked about that. Did this happen because the player came out and complained about it? He transferred and went somewhere else, and then he complained about it. And Dabo came out and said he was correcting the player. He wasn't calling the player that name. He was using that word to correct the player's behavior and not let him use that word again. He was saying, we do not use that word here. But he said it out on the practice field in front of everybody. And Dabo kept him on staff and kept paying him salary. And so to just presume that Brent Venables has to do what Dabo always did, I think that's a folly. I think that would be for some people it would be too hopeful, and for some people it would be the other direction. But yeah, that's something that, Dabo was able to professionally and personally forgive this guy for stepping over those bounds. Brent, on the other hand, he went the other direction. I just found that interesting.
Yeah, and we've kind of had this hypothetical of like what's going to happen because Brent's learned from Snyder and Stoops and Dabo, three guys that very different, ton of success, and
Yep.
three guys known for kind of running their program with that kind of integrity. But like when you just talk about what Brent has said ever since he's arrived on campus, I talked about in my column kind of after this all went down. Remember after the spring game, he finally kind of opened up, and he had talked about you only get a chance to set the culture once, all that stuff, but he'd used that toothpaste analogy of like once it's out of the tube, it's hard to put it back in. I understand all the context and everything. For me, this was not a hard decision for Brent Venables. It's very cut and dry. If this is your rule, then you have to resign, or tender your resignation, whatever. If that's what he's going to be about, and that's everything he said since he arrived. And then after that, the hard part of it is dealing with the fallout of a guy that Brent Venables has a huge relationship with, as they were on staff forever together, a guy like Cale Gundy that has all this relationship with the Oklahoma fan base. But as far as just what happened and the punishment, frankly, I think that was probably the most cut and dry, easiest part of, did this happen? Yes, it happened. Then this is what the punishment is. And now it's on Brent Venables to hold himself in this program to this same bar that he set over and over and over again over however long his tenure is when stuff like that happens, because it was a mistake. You've seen everything from all the former players. You've seen what DeMarco Murray, Rufus Alexander, guys that still work with Cale Gundy every day or work with Cale Gundy every day said. I'm going to let their words and their actions about Cale Gundy's character speak for them. Like, it's clear that it was a mistake, but that's a mistake that everyone in the world knows. You can't make that mistake and hold a privileged job like what's at Oklahoma. So I think that an actual decision was actually the easiest part of it. I think it was knowing the emotional, just if there's hurt from the player side, if there's hurt from, I've known Cale Gundy for this long, knowing that the apprehension of this, what the fan base is going to be. I think that was all in the background. The actual decision seemed very cut and dry and very easy, frankly. It was the absolute right decision, and that's what should have happened.
And I think also the hard part for a lot of people, maybe that's not the right way to present it. The hard part for the fan base to embrace is the fact that Cale came out with his statement on Sunday night and portrayed it. He didn't say it explicitly, but he portrayed it as, I picked this iPad up and I read it, and before I knew what I was saying, the word had come out of my mouth. That's what was portrayed in his resignation. And of course, there was immediate blowback from the fan base and the players and the alumni and all this. Of course, the media as well. That did seem harsh. Wait, it's a slip of the tongue, basically. I don't know what Cale Gundy, I can't vouch for what Cale Gundy's reading comprehension is. He was reading out loud. His brain was behind, his mouth was ahead, all that stuff. But then Brent came out the next day and said, he said it multiple times in a press release, in a statement from the university, from the OU football account.
Big difference.
He said it multiple times. So there's obviously some incongruities there. There's a disagreement about what was originally portrayed and what Brent said happened. Now, I think the consensus is that Brent wasn't in the room, but, you got to believe he got the report from every player that was in the room and said, this is what happened. And then I'm sure probably Cale at some point probably came clean with him and said, yeah, I just repeated saying this. I don't know. But you got to believe that Brent knows ultimately what happened, got enough people to fess up to what they saw, what they heard, what their account of it is. The big question I have, and if we could go back to the press conference, I'd like to ask him one question. If we could raise our hand again one more time, right, and get called on one more time. The original thing was supposed to be 20 minutes, and we hit that in what seemed like 5 minutes, and it was, okay, 2 more questions, guys. I'm like, what? We haven't even started on the actual football team yet. But I'd like to ask him, if we had more time, if we had more questions, if we could ask follow-ups and stuff like that, this is part of OU controlling the message, is keeping their foot on that throttle, right? I'd like to ask him, what was your interactions with Joe Harris, the president, and what was your interactions with Joe Castiglione, your athletic director? Did you run this by them? Did they tell you this? What was the interaction? How did that shake out? Because I'd like to know more about their part in the decision to ask Cale to resign.
We're hopefully learn more about it over time. Obviously, I'm sure you guys saw Cale Gundy's daughter tweeting out, basically, if you haven't seen it, I have a screenshot of it. You can check it out. Basically, not real thrilled with the way Venables framed it. She ended up deleting that tweet. So you wonder if there's more. There's more there. There seems to be some inconsistencies, obviously, between what Cale said and what Brent said, like Hoover referenced in their statements. So I don't know. Hopefully more comes to light at some point. I will ask you guys this real quick before we look at LaDainian Washington and some of the other effects. Does Cale Gundy coach again sometime at a new place? How soon? Just what are some thoughts on that, I guess, for his career? Still a younger guy, obviously. I assume he wants to continue to coach if he can.
Right. He's 50 years old, and he's got a great amount of experience, extensive history in the region for sure. The way I understand it is he's taken this as an opportunity to spend more time with his family. He's going to go up to Stillwater and watch his nephews play football. He's going to go hang out with his brother. No, he's not going to coach the Cowboys. He's Mr. OU, remember? That may be something that happens in the future, but he's not running to Stillwater right now to fill out a job application. That's not happening. He's spending more time with family, because that's something that as a college football coach you don't get to do. So he's taken this as kind of a downtime, kind of an opportunity to maybe reset. And guys, I wouldn't be surprised at all if in spring of 23, he's on staff with Bob Stoops in the XFL.
Yeah, he's a guy that, again, we mentioned it, but the former players, DeMarco Murray, Rufus Alexander, what they came out and said, it's clear this is not a situation where you're pilfering through terrible character, things like that. It was a mistake, right? And it was one mistake that happened, one mistake that has a huge ripple effect. So he'll have a lot of options ahead of him. And if he wants to enter the coaching arena again, I'm sure there'll be a spot for it, but just not at Oklahoma.
Yeah, no, I think he'll get back in there at some point. I wouldn't rule out Oklahoma State at some point. I don't think this year either, like who was saying. But brother there in the state, I don't think it's even as ingrained in OU as he is. I don't think that's out of the question at some point down the road. I am fascinated to see what is the relationship like with OU? He's a former player. He coached there for 20 plus years. How long until he's allowed to be back at spring games and like we saw like junk like that?
Especially with OU going to the SEC, they're not going to be competing against Oklahoma State. He can wear the orange now. He can wear the orange and black. Yeah, I'll tell you this: when I asked Mike Gundy at Big 12 Media Days, do you think you'll have a better relationship with your brother now that they're going to the SEC and you're not going to be competing against them every Thanksgiving? You're going to have an opportunity to just have a regular brother relationship. He kind of downplayed it a little bit, made some jokes, said that they hang out at Grand Lake, stuff like that. Yeah. But the OU Media Day, Barry Trammell asked a question about Brent Venables playing against Cale Gundy. What was that like? And now here he is. He's on your staff, your first staff, and Cale Gundy's your receivers coach. We didn't foresee this coming, you guys. Cale Gundy has been part of the conversation in this preseason, kind of by accident. And then this happens. It's like, oh my God, this guy's getting more press than he has in 20 years at OU.
Yeah, it's still, like we said at the very beginning, doesn't feel like it actually is reality until really that first game. Even then, I'll still be looking over, like, where is he? He's got to be over there somewhere, surely. He's been there so long. And, like Ryan kind of referenced earlier, I don't think my interpretation of what Brent said, I don't think the decision, I think it was a really hard decision, not in the decision, but in dealing with it. I think for Venables, he didn't feel like he had much of a choice. Like this was an easy call for him there. The hard part is dealing with it now. Cause like he said, the program is stronger with Cale Gundy than not. He said that right off the top. I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you that we're great off. I wish Cale was still here, but this had to happen basically. So now we move on to his replacement. LaDamian Washington, how you doing? Welcome to the big show all of a sudden here. Now, we talked about Washington, obviously, back in, I believe it was January, whenever they brought him in. He's a former receiver at Missouri, played in the NFL for a little while, played in the XFL. This is only his third year coaching. Coached at Missouri, coached at Southern, and then OU brought him in. Now, all of a sudden, he's elevated up to being the wide receivers coach at Oklahoma. Generally speaking, it seems like everybody is sure that he's going to do just fine and that he's a future positioning coach sometime in the very near future anyway. This just sped up the process for him, basically. But what are some thoughts from you guys on just how that's going to work? He's going to be the interim, it sounds like, for the entire year, and then they'll make that call after the season is over in terms of, is he going to be the next guy, or are they going to look elsewhere, or how they want to play that. But with LaDamian Washington, how you doing? All of a sudden, his biggest job ever comes in. He's not expecting it, but here you go. This is your room now.
It's strange. 8 months ago, he was hired by Oklahoma to be the offensive analyst and assistant wide receivers coach, and now he's the wide receivers coach. As Brent said yesterday, it's his room. He's in charge now, which is crazy to think about. He's 31 years old, has virtually no coaching experience, no practical everyday coaching experience, full-time, at least on staff anyway. Like you said, kicked around in the AAF, the Battlehawks of St. Louis.
He's got a distinguished NFL, bounced around, Canadian Football League, AAF, yes, and XFL. He's one USFL game away from a free T-shirt.
Yeah,
the Quinella, exactly. But he's 31 years old, and he seems to, at least the report is, I'm not obviously privy to their interactions every day, but I did get to witness it yesterday. He seems to really, really be able to identify with the players. Again, 31 years old, has lived that life, has played that game at an extremely high level. He's where they want to get to. When they look at him and they say, man, that could be me in 10 years. Yeah, that could be you in 10 years. So, they really relate to him. They seem to anyway. He's young. He comes from I was reading his bio on his website. His mother died at a young age. And the siblings basically had to split up. So various relatives could take care of the various kids. And, he comes from a very humble upbringing, not a broken home, but a lot of love. His big brother stepped up and took care of him. Made sure that everybody had what they need and worked 2 jobs and did all that stuff. So multiple jobs, I guess. But he comes from that background where he nothing is given, everything is earned. He's not entitled to anything, and he knows it, and he's willing to work for it. And so you combine those things with his youth and accomplishments and his ability to relate to the kids. Combine that with the background that he comes from. Brent was extremely. We had the story at AllSooners today. Extremely confident that he's the right guy at the right time for this job.
And two, he'll kind of be aided by a couple of things. First off, when you look at the room in particular, Marvin Mims, even though it's just his third year, he's a vet as far as what his expectations have been. Theo Weiss, even though he's coming off an injury, he's been around the program for a long time. Similar with Drake Stoops, as far as like the top 3 guys in that room who we expect at least to be the top 3 guys, bring back a lot of just experience. Even if it's not on the field, if it's not 50 catches a year for some of those guys, it's a group that's been around and can embrace it pretty quickly. Brent Venables was asked about the support off the field, right? You've got Matt Wells, former Texas Tech head coach, who's going to be in that room with him, an incredible resource, can't be technically on the field, all that stuff, but he'll be in the room, breaking down film. Nick Basquin was brought up, another guy that's been around, knows Oklahoma inside and out. So even though Washington's new to this program, new to the day-to-day of coaching, he's going to have that backstop and that support. And all I can kind of go off of is I was there at practice on Monday, right? And this was not a guy who seemed timid, not a guy who was looking around, taking notes from anybody else. Like, they line up that W drill, that very physical drill, and Washington was probably the most active coach as far as stepping in and saying, no. You need to have your hands here. You need to drop. Like, he was getting after him as far as blocking downfield, all that stuff. That to me is not a coach that is oh gosh, am I doing the right thing? He saw something, he wanted it corrected, and he came in and he coached those guys. If there's a big hit that was laid, he's in there celebrating with those guys. He's got that same energy that you've seen from, Miguel Chavis, guys like that. So he clearly, his demeanor through the practice that I saw was very confident, knew what he was doing, and the guys were listening to him, right? Like when he was talking, everyone stopped and they were listening to him, making sure they were going through the drill exactly how he wanted them to go through it. So as far as his coaching record, it's totally unproven, total wild card. I've got no idea if he's going to be a good coach, great coach, bad coach. Couldn't tell you, but just what I saw, he's going to embrace this opportunity, and it's not going to be, if he sees something, he's not going to pipe up because he's the interim guy. He was going about the job as if it was his room, which is all you can ask.
I'm glad you mentioned the other coaches as resources, because Jeff Lebby's a great resource for him as well. How do you want these receivers to do this? Coach, I've never told them, he's learning the offense right now too. So he would go to Lebby and say, how do you want me to approach this specific part of it? I would think Lebby is a fantastic resource for how to run Jeff Lebby's offense, right?
Yeah, who would have thought the obviously extremely under the radar move to bring in Matt Wells as an analyst, his receiver background, man, that's paying off, because I think that's a huge help to have him there. And then Nick Basquin, just kind of cool for him, as Jalen Hurts called him the pride of Norman a few years ago. Still with the program and making it happen. So cool for him to get an elevated opportunity to prove himself a little bit. Not the circumstances you want, obviously, if you're Nick or any of these guys, but it's there now, and all you can do is take advantage of it. So yeah, Matt Wells, it was kind of cool. It was almost poetic in a way of a practice on Monday. The Damian Washington's over there working with the receivers. I'm watching him, kind of just trying to learn about him a little bit, from afar at least. And off to the side, Matt Wells and Dede Westbrook standing there just watching the receivers work. And it's like, and Dede Westbrook, the timing, I mean, he was as outspoken as anybody about Cale Gundy's resignation, how great a guy, and all this stuff. And he's at practice the next day. Like, was that planned beforehand, or did he just in the dead of the night get to Norman? Because I did a double take. Like, that's Dede Westbrook over there. Like, what are the odds of that? So it was almost like, if I was a better photographer, there was some kind of great photo opportunity there somewhere with those two guys just watching the Damian Washington. But I will say this for Washington. He already had a big win recruiting-wise yesterday, because Jaquavius Petaway announced he reaffirmed his commitment to Oklahoma. All three of us were in the same boat and thinking this guy is a heavy decommitment candidate once Cale resigned. He announces he's staying. Huge win for OU there. We'll see how it plays out going forward, but that's a really good start. And even more so than the talent, because we talked about Petaway before, we all think he's a great talent and he's a chance to be a really good player. But just what that says to the rest of the class and incumbent guys that he's staying solid, I think is huge. But just, kind of to put a bow on the Gundy conversation as a whole, just recruiting impact and on-field impact, short-term, long-term, what do we think from there for Oklahoma without Cale moving forward?
The Petaway thing is interesting because his first reaction was just a simple tweet, bro, on social media, right? With the slanty mouth, like, what the hell just happened? Reaction. But to know that a player of that quality comes out 3 days later and says, I ain't going nowhere.
Right.
On Twitter, again, it's a tweet. Take it for what it's worth. But he said, I ain't going nowhere. Post photo of himself in an OU jersey on one of his visits. Like you said, Josh, it's a message to the rest of the class, because Cale Gundy, in a lot of ways, and Ryan referenced it, DeMarco Murray, Jeff Lebby, Joe John Finley, he's recruited players that have come through here, players that have become NFL stars. He's recruited players who have become OU coaches. He has unbelievable amount of influence and fingerprints all over the recruiting. How are they going to move forward without Cale Gundy, who's been recruiting Oklahoma and Texas for 20 years, who's been flying back and forth, with coaches, head coaches or assistant coaches, flying all over the country? How are they going to move forward with him? Well, this is how. This is the first step, and that's Petaway saying, "I'm in." It's going to be a challenge, because there's so many high school programs out there right now who don't know Damian Washington. They don't know whoever might be coming in behind him if he's just in an interim role. They don't know. They don't have a relationship with anybody else. They have a relationship with Cale Gundy because that relationship has been there for 20, 25 years. So that's going to be the hard part to me, is losing a recruiting, literally a recruiting legend.
Yeah, for sure. Especially give a lot of credit to my co-host Chisholm Holland, who said this. How many wins is a wide receivers coach worth on the field come this Saturdays? I would say none. Like Oklahoma's not losing a game because Cale Gundy's not the wide receivers coach, right? And Cale Gundy's an incredible coach, does a ton of development, all that stuff. He's worked with these guys all offseason long. They've had an entire spring and summer of developing with Cale Gundy. Now it's Washington coming in, a new set of eyes is going to work them through this year. The huge impact is always going to be felt with the recruiting. The recruiting is going to be the massive impact, and that is a question that will have to be answered going forward. But the flip side of that is, again, we've talked a ton about everyone in Norman knows Cale Gundy or knows the character of Cale Gundy, all that stuff. That's not how recruiting is played. There's 16, 17-year-old kids, and anyone that was going to be in a recruiting battle with Oklahoma for the rest of time, if Cale Gundy's on staff, is clipping out a headline of these were the words uttered by the guy that's recruiting you, right? They're not going to show them any of the context. They're not going to show any of that. That's recruiting. That's what negative recruiting is. That was going to be a problem that Oklahoma was going to face forever, as long as Cale Gundy's still on staff, right, wrong, or otherwise. So the relationships are strong, all that stuff, but you get one 16-year-old kid, one mom that sees that headline and says, my son's not going there, and you're totally out of the battle already because that you're on staff, right? And that you take Cale Gundy's name out of that and paste any name of any coach in the country. That's the reality of what recruiting is. So it was something that it's going to be a huge impact, but you had to cut ties with that because otherwise it could have lingered and lingered and lingered for classes to come just off of something that someone's going to put in front of a kid.
Yeah, I mean, hard to say. Obviously, down the road, what kind of an impact it'll have. It's going to be hard to know. I mean, we'll never know. Like, would they have got this guy if Cale was still here? But all you can say is you look at Cale Gundy's, recruiting sheet, guys he's credited as having helped get. It's impressive. I mean, Adrian Peterson, DeMarco Murray, Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine, Dede Westbrook. It's a long list of big-time OU players that Cale Gundy is credited as being a big part of why they went to OU. So we'll see how that plays out in the years ahead. I agree with Ryan. I think as far as this season on the field, they're fine. I mean, I may eat those words if the receiving play is just like awful or something, but I think they're probably fine, especially because, like we were saying earlier, the veterans that are there, Marvin and Theo Weiss and Drake Stoops and Brent Venables talking about how good Jaleel Farouk has been. So I think that room is going to be fine in the short term, but the long term, obviously, that's just going to have to remain to be seen. All right, that's it for that. We'll turn the page. We did, like we said, get to go to practice a couple times. We'll talk about some takeaways from that, guys that have stood out. Got a little bit of an injury update that Oklahoma fans aren't going to love from Brent Venables yesterday. We'll talk about all that good stuff coming up next on the AllSooners Podcast. On Twitter, you can follow AllSooners at @all_Sooners. Ryan's at Radios Ryan. Who's at John E. Hoover. I'm at Josh M. Callaway. Our website is allsooners.com. We're a Fan Nation affiliate, part of the Sports Illustrated Network. Okay, segment 2. As we roll on, fall camp is off and running. We got to go to practice a couple times this week. That was only expected to be once, so we got the bonus trip in there, which was nice. It's cool to get to see what these guys look like in person. If you want to get some practice footage, it's up there for you on allsooners.com. I've gotten pretty good reviews on that. People seem to be enjoying those, so check that out on AllSooners, as you can get a little peek behind the curtain there at OU practice. Figure we just kind of open it up to the floor here for some guys that have stood out, or even just the tenor of the practices. I feel like they've been pretty physical, especially Monday. We were just talking before we resumed the show. There was a lot of late pushing and shoving and some skirmishes and stuff on Monday. It was physical. It was an intense practice. Not quite as much on Wednesday, but still, it was still there. When they do that W drill, it's a fun one to watch. But just guys who have stood out to you, anything that's jumped out to you from practice so far. I mean, there's a few obvious ones. Obviously, Brent Venables talked yesterday about how good Justin Harrington has looked. I think he's caught a lot of people's eyes. But what about you guys just in general? You guys have each been once. Ryan was there Monday. Hoover was there yesterday. So you guys have each had a chance. What are your thoughts?
You know who likes your practice footage, Josh, is the recruits. I thought that was pretty neat.
Apparently, yeah. Caleb Hicks with the shout. I appreciate Caleb Hicks, 4-star running back. He tweeted, keep making these. I like to watch these. But then he busted my chops a little bit. He's like, got to get more running backs in there, though. Next time.
Next time. I'll tell you what stood out to me yesterday was how powerful and physical and aggressive Justin Harrington is. He looks like he wants to hurt somebody. You know what I mean? He just plays football at a punishing level.
He looks like guys play football used. Like somehow, some way, he's got to get used.
A lot of guys play football and they're playing analytical, and I don't want to get beat, and I don't want to miss this tackle. He's like a fist. He's like a fist just going through a wall. I mean, there's no measuring or, I guess there are times when that can backfire a little bit, but you always want to be measured when you're playing football and think about what you're doing. But man, he engages and he whips receivers that are trying to block him. I say that. And yesterday in that W drill, it was Jalil Farouk at one point, and things happen. Guys lose their balance or whatever. Jalil Farouk put Harrington on his back. So Farouk has gotten a lot of praise this offseason as well for being thicker, stronger, more powerful, more explosive. I think that stood out. Who else did we say? Gavin Sawchuk, the freshman running back, just got here in June. He looks really good, very explosive, very fast. He glides when he runs. He looks like he's on ice skates compared to a lot of other guys. There's been a lot of we got to see some contact yesterday. We got to see some offensive line, defensive line drills. We got to see that W drill. That's always fun. And you get that kind of sound of being at football practice, and all of a sudden you kind of get that smell too. If you guys know what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying? It's a unique, I don't care how far away they are, it's like, okay, definitely at football practice. This is kind of gross, but yet it's football. And that's one of the things that makes you love it is once you get it in you, it's like, okay, this is amazing. Javante Barnes looked really good, I guess. I didn't see him yesterday, but I saw some reports there's some tweets about he looks pretty solid. And I guess maybe that was Monday. Was it Monday? Monday, Tuesday practice, whatever that was, Tuesday's practice. Tyler Guyton has to walk through doors like that. He blocks out the sun. He's so tall. Who were you saying, Josh? Davis Bevel, 6'6", 6'7", striking. He seems to have not locked up. He seems to have a leg up in the backup quarterback race. A couple other guys stand out here and there. Jaron Canick yesterday, what a freak. What an absolute mechanical beast he is. They got to find a way to get him on the field. And he might be just special teams this year, but Canick is Canick special. And it was funny, too, to see Danny Stutzman. His freshman year, he's out there running around, jacking around, having fun, being expressive. Yesterday I was watching him, and he's just like the leader. You know what I mean? Like the elder statesman almost, like the senior of the group. And he's a sophomore, but yet he has this air about him that he portrays leadership or whatever it is, experience. Those are just a couple of observations that I saw yesterday.
Yeah, my favorite part of the W drill, other than the physicality, is just like, okay, it's a very tight area. I feel like you get a kind of an initial read on how are some of these running backs seeing things, shifty, all that stuff. And the two guys, like Javante Barnes was running over people still, so that's going to be a feature. Gavin Sawchuk was just darting in and out, like just outrunning people in this little tiny area. And you see why DeMarco Murray kind of turned to me at local media. He's like, yeah, we're going to have some fun with him this year. But my biggest thing is that Marcus Major just looks so confident in those little W drill actions. Like he's seen how the block's developing in front of him. One cut, now he's to the next level. And there's 3 levels of blockers in that. And he consistently was finishing through that, not untouched, but just running through stuff. So, and he just physically looks awesome. So that's going to be fun. question I've had too is just how physical are these receivers going to be downfield blocking? Because that wasn't something that the Baylor offense was really known for. It was kind of known for everyone knew where the ball was going to. So one or two guys are running routes pretty hard. Everybody else is kind of like, that's fine. If it wasn't like a reverse coming to your side, they wanted to maul in the middle. No, David Washington, they're like, we're going to hit, we're going to block, and we're going to have good technique. And that's exhibited by kind of what you were talking about with Farouk there from Wednesday's practice. So I think that's going to be something that Jeff Lebby has his eye on, clearly, is what Washington's kind of been pointing out. And I spent some time just watching those linebackers on Monday just because David Agwebu and Danny Stutzman looked to be in a pretty decent battle. And it was just interesting. It was just the individual drills. It was just some stuff like that, changing direction, finishing through pads. But Brent Venables found himself wandering over there, making sure that Agwebu and Stutzman were going through those reps a couple of times before he bounced around to other parts of the field. I think that you can tell those guys are going to get plenty of those extra eyeballs between Roof and Venables, and hopefully that competition kind of brings the best out of them, whether it's Stutzman or Agwebu who comes out on top, or if it's something that they feel good enough to really platoon those stats and keep that spot fresh come this fall.
Thank you guys so much for listening, hanging with us, bearing with us through some technical difficulties there. We'll be back next week, wrapping up next week's practices, and whoever we talk to, whether it's Brent or Lebby or Roof, some players, imagine all that's coming down the pike here pretty soon. So wrap all that up. We'll continue to look ahead to the season opener, which is coming up in just over 3 weeks. It's crazy. You can catch that show, all of the AllSooners podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, Google, iHeart, wherever you get your podcasts. If you have an Amazon deal device, just say, Alexa, play the AllSooners podcast. Also post on our website, allsooners.com. Click on the player list on your phone, your tablet, or your computer. For Ryan Chapman and John Hoover, who's just in the wind, I'm Josh Callaway. We'll catch you guys next time.